from Brooklyn.
That's right. It's been over 100 episodes since we've been in your studio here. And Nate, given what we're going to talk about today, how appropriate that we start in the room where Brooklyn Music Factory originated.
It did. 15 years ago, right here.
Yeah. And I'm in Nate's basement studio in his home.
We woke up just a couple hours ago because we had a marathon weekend with the Founders Forum.
Yes.
Hosting all these awesome owners from all over the world, really.
Yeah.
And
as we did the work over the weekend with everyone, very intense work, going to dinner, staying out late, having awesome conversations with owners and facilitating conversations. While we did have all that fun stuff, there was a lot of content delivered. There was a lot of work that we did with them around team building and hiring and those sorts of things, which of course, if anyone has interest in working with an absolute genius around hiring like Nate, the Founders Forum does open again in the fall for new folks to join to get access to all of Nate's genius and pre-made templates from Brooklyn Music Factory.
Yeah, and joining us.
Yes.
Here in Brooklyn.
Yes. Now, that is an awesome reminder, but that is not why we're here today.
Yeah, we're going to talk. What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, Nate was speaking quite a bit this weekend, and there was a session that Nate did for the folks that came here to Brooklyn. And I was quite taken with it. And even as Nate was talking through his slides, these sorts of things, I thought, we've not really done anything on the podcast about this particular topic. We've touched on it here and there, but I thought, man, it would be great. we can actually satisfy a number of objectives that I have for the podcast this year. We can talk about something that we haven't talked about before. We can talk about something very important, and we can make another attempt at trying to do shorter episodes.
Right.
If we break this topic up into a series.
Yeah.
So we're going to start a series here called Culture Club.
Love it.
Not the 80s band.
No.
But where we talk about company culture. Nate, the first thing I have to ask, why is it important to talk about culture? Why should someone stay tuned for the next several episodes when this is something that, isn't necessarily a marketing strategy? This isn't about AI. This isn't about hiring, which everyone seems to have trouble with, or retaining staff and students. Also something else everyone seems to have trouble with. It's none of those practical things. And yet I have a hunch that you're about ready to tell me that maybe this is what drives all of those things.
Right.
That this might be the most, even though it is somewhat abstract concept, it might be the most important topic we can talk about if all those things are important to you.
Yeah. And I think that there's this, I think you hit it on the head, which is that we have all these sort of strategies and tactics for how to attract amazing families, retain students, attract incredible teachers and support staff, and hopefully retain those teachers and support staff. And we sort of, as we're beginning to build our business, I think naturally we think it's about things like, are we paying them enough? Are we giving them the schedule that they want and need and desire, and sort of some of these purely logistical pieces. And of course, pay is important. We talk a lot about that. Of course, being able to build a team of people where their life aligns with what you're trying to build. So scheduling, that kind of thing, getting the right teacher in the right room with the right level student, teaching the right curriculum, all that stuff is important. But what actually keeps a teacher at your school for 5 years or more is that culture piece, right? And the culture piece feels incredibly elusive, dude. At the beginning, it's like you'll read a book, you'll watch a YouTube video, you'll read a blog post about this kind of thing, and you'll be like, totally. I feel it in my heart that this, like, I know why I started the school. It's for these reasons and blah, blah, blah. But it's very different to have it in your heart and actually have it then permeate out throughout the entire organization. And so culture is what actually keeps people for the long haul. Culture is what keeps people through the rough times. Like, of course, things are going to go wrong in your school. Of course, you're going to have that marketing campaign where you sent the wrong email to 1,000 people and you're just like apologizing. Like, that happens to all of us. Right? But if you have a really solid foundation, if your culture is just very clear and resonant in all positions, whether it's staff or faculty, then you can get through those rough times. Right? People will stick it out with you. Right? The good times and the bad times. Culture is what sort of keeps everybody believing that in your purpose, et cetera. So, yeah, I think it's like that. It feels elusive at first. I'd say in your first 3 to 5 years of running your studio or school, it's probably not a top priority at all. Right? You're just literally trying to figure out how to make sure people get paid.
Sure.
I dig it. But if you're in that sort of 3 to 5 year stage or much further, then culture is paramount. And this series that we're doing, I think, is for you.
Yeah, right.
Yes, it is for you. And just to put some definition on the series itself, what Nate did 2 days ago, this past Sunday, had a session called Company Culture, 6 Keys to Company Culture. And so we're going to go through each of those keys. And even some of the things that you were saying there is kind of teasing some exercises that we're going to give folks to do. Short exercises to do after each of these episodes so that you can begin to define culture in your company and kind of set these foundations that Nate is talking about. So I'm going to get poetic here for a second. You can see the effects of the wind.
Yeah.
But how do you define the wind? Okay? What you were just saying there is kind of the effects of culture. But that isn't defining it.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you have a working definition in your head, just like a sentence or a statement or two of what culture is. I did ask my friend ChatGPT to define company culture for me.
What did Chat say?
Company culture is the shared values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that define how people within an organization interact and work together. It's, more formally, it's how we do things around here.
Yeah.
And it shows up in how leaders lead, how decisions get made, what gets rewarded and punished, how people communicate, the way problems are handled, and the overall energy and identity of the team.
Nice. What do you think, Nate?
I mean, I like it. I might frame it slightly differently in BMF language, but
let's hear that.
I dig it. I want to actually zoom out a little bit because we're gonna, over the next maybe 6 episodes, we're gonna really kind of dig into some concrete exercises on how to address some of these different points of the definition. But in preparation for the weekend of the forum, I was going back and rereading a bunch of my notes and writing, and just preparation and teachings that have been done, given to me by some of my mentors. And one of the ways that we can define culture in much simpler terms is like this idea, it was taught to me, is like you have formal culture and you have informal culture. And formal culture may be what we aspire our school to sort of look and act like. But it may or may not actually be like that at all. In other words, if I were to just give you a quick example at BMF in the early days, when we were in this very studio is where we had our first, what we call them piano summits, right? And we literally, Ben was sitting right there, though it looked a little different. and we were trying to create gamified ways of teaching piano. So just the very foundation of big music games was started here. And so in my mind, I'd be like, we're going to live, breathe, eat this. Everybody's going to leave a piano summit and start gamifying their lessons. And clearly the culture of this place is going to be around playfulness, joy, gamifying everything.
Yeah.
Well, it's very different for me to be like in my head aspiring for that to happen than for it to actually happen in Ben's piano lesson.
Exactly, because he does not have the perspective that you have.
He's not bringing in a life of that.
Yeah.
And he's just been at a 60-minute piano summit where we talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very different to then go out and have it like be pervasive in every lesson in your school. If that's a BMF example. So formal culture is like, this is what we aspire it to be. Really, it's what the founder aspires the school to be in terms of what is you walk into any studio in your school and it has a very palpable energy that matches what you imagine the energy to be in your mind, in your heart, right? Informal culture is what it actually looks and feels like to work at your school, right? And so that's kind of profound actually to sit with for a minute because you don't actually define what it looks and feels like to work at your school. You're the founder. It's the desk person, your piano teacher, your violin teacher, your drum teacher. It's your bookkeeper. They're all defining what it looks and feels like to work at your school, right? And so, and the reason why that's so profound and important is because you're trying to unify the experience across all roles within your school, so that it has a unified perspective and energy on how we show up to work. Right, and ChatGPT was like, how we get work done, or whatever the last thing it said was. And so it's that informal culture that we're really actually focused on in this series. We want to know what it actually looks and feels like at your school right now, today, across all these different roles. And we want to know if that is somewhat close to what your aspirational or formal culture is. You dig?
I do.
And it could be very far apart right now for you, but you can still have hope, right? There are ways to bring them closer together, and that's why we're doing this series.
Okay.
I'm going to pick up a context clue here and say that at the beginning you had this desire to make the fledgling Brooklyn Music Factory a gamified experience, a fun experience for students. And for those who are fans of the podcast, they'll know one of your kind of mythologies, your legends, is that at the beginning you were hiring basically your friends who weren't necessarily educators.
No.
And I imagine you had a hard time getting them on board with that because maybe they're playing at a jazz club until 3 a.m. the night before, and then you're asking to teach a bunch of 8-year-olds the next afternoon. Maybe they're not showing up as their best self.
Yeah.
Now, here's the actual question. I would imagine if you look back and rated what your company culture was back then, as evidenced, or I'm sorry, not as evidence, but as if you rated it based on what you wanted versus what you were getting, it was probably very low.
Yeah.
And I bet now what you want versus what you're getting is probably pretty high.
It's radically different.
Yeah.
And a clarifier there. And I love that example of like, did we hire our friends? Because of course I did.
Yeah.
And they're still my friends.
Sure.
Right.
They're just not working for Brooklyn
They're
Music
just not
Factory.
working in the factory.
They needed to be kept in the friend box, not in the friend/employee box.
Totally. Like I'm literally making a record with one of them right here in a few weeks.
Okay.
So that's all good. And that's beautiful. And the thing is that the aspirational culture of what you want in your school, we have to learn how to discern the difference between that and what made you and I friends. Because the sort of some of those values and principles and things that attracted to us becoming friends, those aren't all showing up in your company, right? They're not like, you're not like literally you have to overlap exactly with me in order to be hired, right? Plus, it's very different to just take your values and say that's enough. You need to have values coupled with the desire to train to the skills required to deliver on the promise that your unique program is offering. So my friends, like I said, all of whom are still my friends, we had a lot of overlapping values, But whether or not they wanted to actually train up to be able to meet and deliver on promise to a group of 8-year-olds, that was a question I never asked back then. You know, I was just like, we like hanging out together. Surely we're going to have a great time.
Yeah.
You know, not enough.
So where I'm going with this is, and thinking about Brooklyn Music Factory and using it as a case study, if people go through this series with us on the podcast and they're considering what these 6 keys to culture are, and they're doing some of the exercises that we're giving them, some of the basic ones, we have much more advanced ones in the forum, obviously. And if you want to know when the forum starts again, just go to growyourmusicstudio.com/forum. You can sign up for the interest list there, and we'll let you know when it is possible to work with Nate and myself again. But what's at stake here? If people get company culture right, what happens? What problems go away? What things suddenly become? And I'm going to use this terminology unironically. Like, what starts just to begin to feel joyful and magical and like I can't believe this is happening. So what problems go away? What starts to feel joyful? Let's just maybe even in the episode defining that. And then we'll see if we can keep to our goal of having short episodes here for a little while.
We have a 2025 goal of trying to rock the 20 to 30 minute app for your benefit.
Yeah.
Really, so that you guys get to the end of your commute and you're like, great, I got a whole episode.
Yeah. And up to this point, it's like May now, and we still haven't done it yet. But
but this is a classic example of formal versus informal. We have aspirational goals, but we are going to realize that. You guys can hold us accountable to that. Okay, let me actually. We talked a little bit about one of the real benefits, which is, of course, from just like a business health standpoint.
Sure.
There's massive benefit because if your teachers, if the culture of your school starts to come into focus, then it radically changes your hiring process, and you start attracting teachers in a much more intentional way that is a much better culture fit, that is literally looking for your type of community.
So my understanding there would be then they would stay longer.
Yeah,
because they're totally bought in, totally invested.
Yeah, and you still have to enculture them when they arrive, but at least you're setting yourself up for success, and you're setting them up for success in the hiring process. So yeah, teachers stay longer. We all know that teacher retention leads to improved quality of the service.
Yes.
Right?
Also leads to operational and financial efficiency.
Yeah, totally.
Because you're not having to constantly be, even just down to small things like paying for ads to find teachers, or spending more time in training, or meetings to get teachers on board with the program, sort of thing.
Right, yeah. And we oftentimes use terms like I need an admin, and that sort of sounds like diminishing. The reality is your administrative staff is equally important to your teaching staff, and if you can retain them due to a great culture for 5 years, man, your efficiency is going to go up, right? Because someone who's highly trained and in a really awesome rhythm running your entire school, that they're going to save you time. But there's another piece, and you said, you sort of alluded to this, that I think is really important and probably a great place to end. Though I did want to give one exercise. Can I give one exercise as part of this episode?
At the very end.
Very end. Okay, one quick exercise at the very end. So you have a concrete action you can take away, which of course is always important to us here. You gotta get something done. Your school, and I alluded to this earlier, your school is going to have issues. Every school, especially as you're scaling, a lot of the schools we work with in the forum are moving from that 150 to 250 or 300 student enrollment, and they want to blow through the 500 to 600 student enrollment target. And then some of them are in the 500 and they want to get to the 1,000.
Or they have operational problems because they're so large, and maybe their margins are very low, even though they're making massive amounts of money every month.
Yeah,
so their margins are super low, and they need them to improve. And they,
right,
yeah, another good fit for the forum.
There you go. Low margins, big enrollment. Talk to Daniel and Nate. Yeah. Anyways, there's a very real and discernible difference in what it's like to tackle those issues when you begin to get that culture piece in focus, which is that currently you might be listening and thinking, whenever there's a real problem, it's my problem. I own the problem. Once your culture comes into focus and people start feeling like they belong to something larger than themselves, which is key, this is really one of the keys with culture, is that you start defining your work experience not as your own individual experience, but as the experience of the community or organization you're in. Then when those problems come along, you as an owner start to feel like you have support, right? Instead of the problem being, this is my problem, I better fix it in order to retain my staff and teachers, a problem comes along and you have staff and teachers that are interested in fixing it with you. And that is a radical difference. If you're listening to this pod right now and thinking there's nobody in my organization that would want to take on, say, the payroll issue I'm having, or the facility problems I have, or all the gear problems I have, whatever the problem is, it doesn't matter. Don't worry, we have dozens on our list, school owners. Once we start getting that culture piece in focus, it's so palpable the difference that you have actually a team of people that want to tackle problems. And so that may even feel elusive to our listeners right now. They might be like, I can't even imagine that version of it. But it's not elusive at BMF. And it's not elusive at schools that have gone through the hard work of actually developing a culture, right? Doing the 6 exercises that we're going to introduce over the next 6 episodes.
Sure.
So.
And I will just say that, just an observation, so many school owners come to me and say, I want to create a company culture. How do I create a company culture? I think that shows a couple things. It shows maybe not a misunderstanding of what company culture is, but it shows that it's still an abstract concept.
Yeah.
So maybe even looking into what it is and defining it for yourself would be helpful. The other thing is that your company does have a culture, whether you think it does or not.
Totally.
And it could be dysfunctional. It could be inefficient. It could be warm and inviting. Like, you could have unintentionally created a culture that's actually very, very good.
You might be close to what you're aspiring to.
Exactly. And my point is if you don't know that you're there, that actually is a problem for you.
Yeah.
If you don't know what it is. And so one of the exercises that we have coming up for you, probably in the very next episode, is just showing you how to define it for yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give very real examples from my own studio. I'm going to give examples from grouplessons.com, the Piano Express. I know you're going to give examples. But I do want to acknowledge that this is an issue that I think, because it's an abstract concept, or it seems like an abstract concept, people have real trouble defining it. I just want to acknowledge that even at the end of this episode, if you feel a little confused, it's like, well, wait a minute. I know that they just defined it, but I still don't feel like I know what it is. Maybe go and Google it, do a little reading on it, ask ChatGPT, and just begin to wrap your mind around it. There's many different definitions for it. Some have called it the invisible operating system of your business. Others have called it, I think Peter Drucker said, it's how you know who to let on the boat. Who belongs on this ship and who doesn't?
Back to the hiring piece.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of ways to define it. I think as you begin to look at it from many different angles, you begin to say like, oh, I'm starting to get it now.
Yeah.
I know right now that at grouplessons.com, our culture is very well defined, because there was someone who I met this year, and I immediately thought she 100% belongs in this company. Right. No question, she belongs in this company. She will be happy here. She will feel seen here. Yeah. Her unique skill set and the way she likes to work is perfectly in line with how we do things here. Even her personality will gel with the team. And
it's hard to know that if you don't have some clarity.
Yeah, if you don't have clarity. 100%.
Okay.
So that might be my last piece. Do you want to go ahead and hit that exercise?
I want to give you an exercise, and
this is kind of it'll be a little talky, so we might even put this in the show notes or something, these questions.
Yeah, that could be good, but if you can take notes now, because you can implement within 24 hours. So the very first step, of course, is you need to know what your teachers and staff actually think of working at your school, right? So let me give you a series of questions. And this is, again, in the forum, we do a really detailed survey. We make these surveys together. It's a lot of doing work together in the Founders Forum.
Yeah.
But these are some of the just tail end questions, and it's a great place to start. So we just do a Google form, super simple, lo-fi, don't worry about the tool, don't get caught up in any of those details. Just get feedback as efficiently as possible for you. So first question is, do you know what is expected of you as a teacher at your school, at BMF, at Brooklyn Music Factory? Do you know what's expected of you? Do you have the opportunity to do your best teaching at BMF? We say teaching, so this is a faculty survey. Have you received recognition or praise recently? Do you feel cared about as a person at Brooklyn Music Factory? Do you feel connections with any of your coworkers at Brooklyn Music Factory? And these last 4 questions are the key. So if those first, we're just kind of warming them up, these last 4 are essential. What is the number one most frustrating aspect of your job at Brooklyn Music Factory? In parentheses, this is the way I try to massage them a little bit. If you could wave a magic wand and have it disappear, you 100% would ... Okay.
Wait, what that last one?
If you could, so what's the number one most frustrating aspect of your gig? Reframed. If you could magic wave a wand and have it disappear, what would it be?
Okay.
Right. Just so because some people are like, I don't want to write something that I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of frame it in a way that
That's smart.
They consider answering it. What is the number one most joyful aspect of your job? If you could keep just one thing, you 100% would keep this, right? It's the one thing that you want to keep teaching at BMF. And then finally, 2 other questions. If you could realize one huge dream at Brooklyn Music Factory, what would it be? Even it seems impossible to you now, what would you like BMF to build, launch, host, represent, anything? What do you want to see, right? And then the final thing, wide open question. Anything else you want to share? So that aggregate of answers is where you begin to understand what it actually currently looks and feels like to teach at your school.
Yeah, and this is just the easy part of the survey. There's more that we have people do in the
there's another 25 questions. But just to wrap this up on that, step 1 for all of our listeners is you got to know, you have no idea how far away you are between your aspirational goals of culture versus your actual, the formal versus informal, until you figure out where you are today.
Yes.
And so let's say you have 10 teachers and you send these out to them. Don't expect all 10 to answer. They won't.
You can keep pestering them though.
Yeah, you can. Daniel would.
I absolutely would.
But if you get 8 responses, 4 or 5 of which are really open and honest, that is a great first snapshot of the culture of your company right now.
And to wrap, what I will tell you is that now that you have this data in front of you because you've taken action, you haven't just let this be your intellectual entertainment, you might be looking at that and saying, yeah, but I still don't know what I'm aspiring to, or it's kind of hazy or it's foggy for me. That's what we're going to talk about in the next episode. We are absolutely going to help you define what your aspirational goals are. And I will tell you that Nate is very, very good at this. I know that I'm very, very good at this. We're going to walk you through this and help you figure it out for you. So, Nate, any last thoughts or should we wrap?
Wrapping up live from Brooklyn.
All right.
It's the 7FMS podcast.
Cool.
We'll see you in the next one.